The volcanic glass walls of the stronghold loomed like frozen waves of obsidian, catching and fracturing the amber light into thousands of crystalline reflections. Combat Medic. First Class. Luther Hayes watched the play of light across the polished floor, focusing on anything but the neural shackles binding his wrists. 3 days in captivity had taught him that struggling against the restraints only intensified the electric pulses that shot through his nervous system. A predatory scent hung in the recycled air, something like sandalwood mixed with ozone and the metallic tang of weapons-grade alloys. The AmberClan fortress had been carved directly from an extinct volcano on this nameless moon. And despite the environmental regulators humming in the walls, the place retained a primordial heat that made Luther's prison uniform cling to his skin. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. 2 guards entered, their feline ears twitching above elongated faces. The gold insignia on their armor marked them as direct reports to the Amber Warlord herself. "The Warlord demands your presence," said the taller one, voice a rumbling growl that needed no translation device. The AmberClan had adapted their vocal cords to approximate human speech decades ago, one of many advantages that had allowed them to push humanity back to its last defensive line in this sector. Luther rose slowly, careful not to trigger the shackles. "What does Siller want with a combat medic? I've already told your interrogators everything I know." The guards exchanged looks. "You will address her as Warlord or Supreme Commander," the second guard snapped, golden eyes narrowing to slits. "And it is not your place to question." They escorted him through winding corridors of volcanic glass, each turn revealing more of the fortress's brutal architecture. Squads of AmberClan soldiers passed, their sleek forms radiating lethal efficiency. Some paused to stare at the human prisoner, the first captured alive in this sector since the war began. Luther had been treating wounded at Forward Operating Base Horizon when the AmberClan attack came. While others fled or fought, he'd stayed with patients too critical to move. That decision had cost him his freedom, but preserved his oath as a medic. He wondered now if the Warlord had finally tired of his limited intelligence value. The command center doors parted to reveal a cavernous chamber dominated by a throne of jagged volcanic glass. The room buzzed with activity, tactical officers monitoring holographic displays, communications specialists hunched over consoles, and perimeter guards stationed at regular intervals. But the throne itself was empty. Instead, at the center of the room, surrounded by concerned officers, a figure lay sprawled on the floor, even collapsed. There was no mistaking the Amber Warlord. Siller's form was longer, more powerful than her subordinates. Her fur was the deep golden amber that gave her clan its name, and the ceremonial scars that tracked across her exposed arms told the story of countless victories. Now, that powerful body convulsed with uncontrolled tremors. What happened? A tall AmberClan male with silver-streaked fur and a general's insignia demanded of no one in particular. "Who was with her when she collapsed?" "I was General Vorak," answered a slender female officer. "She was reviewing tactical displays when she stumbled. Then, this." Luther stood in the doorway, the guards uncertain whether to bring him closer. The general noticed him and snarled, "Why is this prisoner here?" "The Warlord demanded him specifically, sir," the guard replied, "before she collapsed." The convulsing figure on the floor suddenly stilled. Golden eyes snapped open, focusing with terrifying clarity. "The human," Siller rasped, her claws scraping against the polished floor as she tried to rise. "Bring him here." Luther was shoved forward, falling to his knees beside the Warlord. Up close, he could see the dilated pupils, the tremor in her limbs, even as she fought to control them. "You're a medic," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fix this, or when I die, you die with me." Luther glanced at the ring of hostile faces surrounding them. "I need these restraints removed if I'm to help you." General Vorak stepped forward. Absolutely not, Warlord. Let our own healers. They have tried, Siller snapped, then winced as another tremor passed through her body. 3 days, Vorak. 3 days of decline while they mumble about unfamiliar symptoms. Her gaze locked on Luther. Human medicine sometimes proves unexpectedly useful. Luther recognized the immense cost of those words. For the proud warlord to admit human superiority in anything, even medicine, spoke to her desperation. Release his restraints, she ordered. Warlord, Vorak began. Now! The word became a growl that sent officers scurrying to obey despite their reservations. The neural shackles deactivated with a soft click. Luther rubbed his wrists, acutely aware that every movement was being monitored by hostile eyes. He took a deep breath, falling into the methodical calm that had served him through a decade of combat medicine. I need to examine you, he said. And I'll need information. When did the symptoms begin? What treatments have your healers attempted? Siller's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. 3 days ago. Fatigue first, then muscle tremors. Now, neural disruption. Luther carefully placed his fingers against her neck, feeling for the carotid pulse. The Amber Clan anatomy was similar enough to human in key respects, a legacy of the genetic manipulation their ancestors had undergone centuries ago to make them more effective hunters. Her pulse was rapid, irregular. Fever? He asked. Yes, the female officer who had been with Siller answered. Fluctuating. Luther continued his examination, aware of the rising tension in the room. I need diagnostic equipment, blood analysis, neural scanning. Impossible, General Vorak interrupted. Our medical facilities are restricted to... Give him what he needs, Siller commanded. Though her voice was weaker now, she turned to Luther, her golden eyes fixed on his. But understand this, human. If this is some trick, some attempt to gather intelligence or sabotage our command structure, I will ensure your death is remembered in human nightmares for generations. Luther met her gaze steadily. I'm a medic. My oath doesn't recognize enemy lines. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded once before another convulsion took her. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Luther was escorted to the Amber Clan Medical Bay, a sleek facility with technology that made his combat field kit look primitive by comparison. 2 Amber Clan healers watched his every move, their distrust evident but their need for help overriding their prejudice. Blood samples revealed anomalies that confirmed Luther's growing suspicion. Neural scans showed progressive degradation along key pathways. When the results of the bone marrow aspiration came back, the picture was complete. It's a targeted toxin, Luther told the assembled officers in the command center. Siller had been moved to her private quarters, connected to stabilizing equipment that bought time, but offered no cure. Engineered specifically for Amber Clan physiology, it's concentrating in the bone marrow, disrupting neural function and autoimmune responses. General Vorak stepped forward, towering over Luther. A biological weapon? You accuse us of being poisoned by your military? I'm stating medical facts, not making accusations, Luther replied calmly. The toxin is sophisticated, beyond anything in standard human bioweapons protocols. But yes, it appears designed to target Amber Clan leadership specifically. The room erupted in angry murmurs. The slender female officer, Luther, had learned her name was Lieutenant Kalin, raised her voice above the others. How would such a toxin be administered? The Warlord's food and environment are continuously monitored. Slow-release delivery system, Luther explained. Based on the progression, I'd estimate exposure was approximately 2 weeks ago. It could have been in anything, a piece of equipment, a gift, even a captured human weapon examined as intelligence. Vorak's ears flattened against his skull. Can you neutralize it? Luther hesitated. Theoretically, yes. The toxin targets specific proteins in AmberClan bone marrow. A transfusion of healthy, compatible marrow, combined with a synthesized neutralizing agent, could reverse the damage. Then do it, Vorak commanded. It's not that simple, Luther continued. The Warlord's genetic profile is unique, a result of her bloodline and the genetic modifications your ancestors underwent. Finding a compatible donor would be impossible, interrupted one of the AmberClan healers. The Warlord's lineage is ancient and pure. None in the clan share sufficient compatibility markers. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Without compatible marrow, Siller would die within days, perhaps hours. There is one possibility, Luther said slowly, the idea forming even as he spoke. Human and AmberClan DNA share a surprising number of compatible markers, a legacy of our common evolutionary origin on Earth before your ancestors were modified for deep space exploration. Vorak's expression shifted to one of disgust. You suggest we pollute our warlord with human genetic material? I suggest we save her life, Luther countered. And not just any human would work. You would need someone with exceptionally adaptive immunological markers and regenerative capabilities. Where would we find such a human? Lieutenant Kalen asked, her tone speculative. Luther took a deep breath. You already have. Combat medics undergo extensive genetic screening and modification. Our regenerative capabilities are enhanced to allow us to function in combat zones with high radiation and biological contamination risks. He met Vorak's suspicious gaze. My marrow is compatible. I've reviewed the genetic profiles. A heavy silence fell over the room. Luther could almost see the calculations running behind Vorak's eyes, weighing Siller's life against the taboo of human biological material, weighing Luther's apparent cooperation against the possibility of deception. Take him to the Warlord, Vorak finally ordered. She will decide. Luther was escorted to Siller's quarters, a surprisingly austere chamber for the leader of such a powerful force. The room's only concession to luxury was a viewport that showcased the desolate beauty of the moon's cratered surface and the distant stars beyond. Siller lay on a medical platform, her golden fur dulled by illness, her powerful frame diminished by the tremors that occasionally passed through her body. Medical equipment hummed around her, monitoring vital signs that Luther could see were deteriorating rapidly. Leave us, she commanded the guards, her voice surprisingly strong despite her condition. When they hesitated, her eyes flashed. Now! The doors slid closed, leaving Luther alone with the alien warlord who had decimated half a dozen human outposts in the past year alone. You have found the cause, she stated, rather than asked. Yes, a targeted toxin affecting your bone marrow and neural pathways. Siller nodded, unsurprised. And the cure? Bone marrow transplant from a compatible donor, combined with a synthesized neutralizing agent. There are no compatible donors among my kind, she said, again with certainty. No, Luther agreed. But there is one option. He explained his proposal, watching her face for reaction. When he finished, Siller was silent for a long moment. Then she laughed, a harsh, rasping sound. You offer your own marrow to save the enemy who captured you, who has killed your kind by the thousands. Luther met her gaze. I'm a medic, you're a patient. So simple for you? Her golden eyes studied him with new interest. And the procedure? How would this transfer occur? That's the complicated part, Luther admitted. The equipment here isn't designed for human physiology. The extraction would be difficult. Painful, she translated. Extremely. Siller pushed herself up, fighting against the weakness in her limbs. You would endure this pain for an enemy. To save a life, Luther corrected. She stared at him for a long moment, then sank back onto the platform. Even if I agreed to this abomination, Vorak and the others would never allow it. The contamination of the Warlord's bloodline with human material would be seen as worse than death. They don't need to know the source, Luther said quietly. Only that I've synthesized a cure. Siller's eyes widened slightly. You would lie to protect me from shame among my kind? I would do what's necessary to save my patient. Another tremor passed through her body, more violent than before. When it subsided, she fixed him with a penetrating stare. If I die, Vorak assumes command. He has advocated for complete extermination of human presence in this sector. Kalen supports him. The war would escalate beyond measure. Luther understood then that her concern was not just for her own life, but for the broader conflict. Despite being enemies, they shared at least one goal: preventing the war from becoming even more catastrophic. Then we should proceed quickly, he said. Siller nodded once. What do you require? Access to the medical bay without supervision, specific equipment and compounds. He listed what he needed, watching as she committed it to memory. I will arrange it, she said. But know this, human. If this is deception, if you attempt escape or sabotage— I understand the stakes, Luther interrupted. And I gave you my word as a medic. She studied him for a moment longer. Then, reached for a communication device beside her platform. Lieutenant Kalen, attend me immediately. When Kalen arrived minutes later, Siller issued clear instructions. Luther was to have unrestricted access to the medical facilities and whatever equipment he required. He was to be monitored via the facility's surveillance systems, but not directly supervised in his work. The human believes he can synthesize a cure, Siller explained, careful with her wording. We will allow him this attempt. Kalen's eyes narrowed. General Vorak has expressed concerns about allowing the prisoner such freedom. General Vorak is not Warlord, Siller replied coldly. Not yet, and not ever. If this succeeds— Kalen bowed her head in acquiescence. But Luther caught the calculating look in her eyes before she turned to lead him to the medical bay. The next 12 hours were a blur of intensive preparation. Luther worked methodically, using the advanced AmberClan equipment to synthesize the neutralizing agent that would counteract the toxin once healthy marrow was introduced to Siller's system. The surveillance cameras tracked his every movement, but as promised, no guards or healers interfered with his work. When the final compound was prepared, Luther took a moment to stare at the empty chamber where the donor marrow would need to be placed. The next step would be the most difficult, and he had deliberately left it unplanned in the surveillance footage. He sent word that he was ready to proceed with the final phase. Minutes later, Lieutenant Kalen arrived to escort him back to Siller's quarters. As they walked the polished corridors, Luther noticed increased activity among the fortress personnel. Something happening? He asked casually. Kalen glanced at him, her expression guarded. General Vorak has called the clan lieutenants to an emergency council. He believes the Warlord's condition requires contingency planning. Political maneuvering already, Luther thought. The succession battle was beginning before Siller was even dead. When they reached Siller's quarters, they found her alone. Her condition visibly deteriorated. The tremors were now constant, and the medical monitors showed dangerously erratic vital signs. Leave us, Siller ordered Kalen, who hesitated before complying. When the door closed, Luther moved quickly to Siller's side. We don't have much time. The neutralizing agent is ready, but we need the marrow transplant immediately. Siller's eyes were clearer than they had been earlier. She had clearly reduced her pain medication to maintain lucidity. How will you extract your marrow? The equipment won't work for this, Luther finished. Which is why we need a different approach. He reached into his medical tunic and withdrew a surgical blade he had concealed there. The most concentrated source of viable marrow will come from a major limb. Specifically, my arm. Siller's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You intend to amputate your own limb? Without anesthesia? The surveillance systems would detect any use of anesthetics, Luther explained. and Vorak would intervene if he knew the true nature of the procedure. "This is madness," Siller growled. "The pain alone would—" "I've been through worse," Luther lied, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "But I'll need your help. Once I begin, I'll go into shock quickly. You'll need to complete the extraction and combine the marrow with the neutralizing agent, according to the protocol I've prepared." He placed a small data chip on the platform beside her. "Everything you need to know is here. The question is, can you do it?" Siller stared at him, genuine bewilderment in her golden eyes. "You would sacrifice your limb for me, your enemy." "For my patient," Luther corrected again, "and to prevent this war from becoming even worse under Vorak's command." She continued to stare at him, searching for deception and finding none. Finally, she nodded. "I will do my part. But you must know, in my culture, such a sacrifice creates a life debt that cannot be ignored. If I survive this—" "Let's focus on making sure you do," Luther said, rolling up his sleeve and exposing his left arm. He had chosen the non-dominant limb, though the distinction seemed academic given what he was about to do. He placed a medical tourniquet high on his upper arm, tightening it until the blood flow diminished. Then he laid out the surgical tools he had brought and positioned himself beside Siller's platform. "Quickly now," he instructed. "Once I begin, we'll have minutes at most before someone responds to the medical alerts." Siller pushed herself upright, fighting through the tremors. "Begin." Luther took a deep breath, focusing his mind as he had been trained. Then, with precise medical skill and terrifying resolve, he made the first incision, just below his shoulder. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced or imagined. His medical training allowed him to make the cut clean and precise, but nothing could prepare him for the sensation of slicing through his own flesh and muscle. Blood poured from the wound, but the tourniquet kept it from becoming immediately life-threatening. He continued methodically, cutting through layer after layer, the room swimming around him as shock began to set in. The sound of his own bones saw scraping against humerus would haunt him forever, if he survived this. His vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges, but Luther forced himself to continue. He was vaguely aware of Siller moving beside him, her own pain momentarily forgotten as she watched in stunned disbelief. When the bone finally separated, Luther could no longer stand. He collapsed against the platform, his remaining hand fumbling for the extracted limb. "The marrow," he gasped. "You need to extract. Follow the protocol." The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was Siller's face, transformed by an emotion he had never expected to see in the Amber Warlord: respect. Luther drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of fragments of reality. Siller's voice commanding someone to stabilize him, but tell no one what had happened. The sensation of being moved, the burn of regenerative compounds being applied to his shoulder. When he finally regained full consciousness, he found himself in a small medical alcove adjacent to Siller's quarters. His left shoulder was covered in advanced healing tech, the amputation site already sealed and in the early stages of regeneration. The Amber Clan medical technology was impressive. He would survive, though the arm was gone forever. A shadow fell across him, and Luther looked up to see Siller standing in the doorway. The change in her was remarkable. Though still weakened, the tremors had stopped completely. Her eyes were clear, her posture once again commanding. "It worked," he said, his voice hoarse. "Yes." She moved closer, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Your marrow and the neutralizing agent have eliminated the toxin. The healers are baffled by my miraculous recovery." "They don't know?" "Only that you synthesized a cure, as we agreed." She paused. "Why did you do it? The truth, human." Luther closed his eyes briefly, gathering his thoughts. "Partly What I told you before. My medical oath. The desire to prevent further escalation of the war. He opened his eyes to meet her gaze. But also, because no one deserves to die that way. Poisoned, betrayed by their own body. Siller nodded slowly. Among my kind, what you have done creates a bond that cannot be broken. A life debt that can only be repaid in kind. I don't expect... What you expect is irrelevant, she interrupted. Our ways are ancient and immutable. You sacrificed your limb for my life. I am bound by honor to consider you my equal. No Amber clan has ever named a human thus. Luther wasn't sure how to respond. Equal to the Warlord was not a position he had ever aspired to, nor one he understood the implications of. Before he could formulate a response, alarms began blaring throughout the fortress. Siller's head snapped up, ears pivoting toward the sound. What is it? Luther asked. Perimeter breach. Her eyes narrowed. Impossible. Our defenses. The door to the medical alcove slid open, and Lieutenant Kalen rushed in. She stopped short when she saw Siller standing, clearly recovered. Warlord, you're... She composed herself quickly. General Vorak has declared emergency protocols. A human stealth vessel has been detected approaching the southern quadrant. Siller's posture changed subtly, becoming more alert, more predatory. Curious timing. Assemble the command staff immediately. Yes, Warlord. Kalen's eyes flicked to Luther, then back to Siller. What about the prisoner? He remains in my custody, Siller said firmly. Secure him here until I return. When Kalen had gone, Siller turned back to Luther. This is not coincidence. A human stealth vessel, precisely when I recover from an assassination attempt. Luther frowned. You think the two are connected? I think, Siller said carefully, that someone wanted me dead before that vessel arrived. Someone with access to advanced biological weapons and knowledge of my movements. Her golden eyes bored into his. What do you know of this? Nothing, Luther answered honestly. I've been a prisoner here since the attack on Horizon. Whatever's happening, I'm as much in the dark as you are. Siller studied him for a long moment, then appeared to come to a decision. Wait here. Touch nothing. I will return when I know more. She left, sealing the door behind her. Luther lay back, exhaustion and pain overwhelming him now that the immediate crisis had passed. Despite her warning, he found himself drifting into unconsciousness again. He woke to the sound of the door sliding open. Expecting Siller, he was surprised to see Lieutenant Kalen enter, accompanied by 2 guards. Get up, she ordered. General Vorak wants you in the interrogation chamber immediately. Luther struggled to sit upright, his body still weak from blood loss and trauma. The Warlord ordered me to remain here. Kalen's expression was cold. The Warlord is currently occupied with the human incursion. The General's orders take precedence in security matters. The guards moved forward to seize him, roughly pulling him to his feet. The sudden movement sent pain lancing through his shoulder, and Luther bit back a cry. As they dragged him through the corridors, Luther's tactical training kicked in. He memorized the route, noting security checkpoints and personnel deployments. The fortress was on high alert. Armed Amber Clan moved with purpose, and several times their group was forced to detour around sealed security zones. Instead of the interrogation chamber, however, they brought him to a small communications room deep within the fortress. General Vorak waited inside, along with several officers Luther hadn't seen before. Secure the door, Vorak ordered as they entered. The guards positioned themselves outside, leaving Luther alone with Vorak, Kalen, and the unknown officers. Vorak turned to Luther, his expression unreadable. Your recovery of the Warlord was unexpected. I'm a good medic, Luther replied carefully. Too good. Perhaps. Vorak circled him slowly. The human vessel approaching our position bears the markings of a special operations craft. Its trajectory suggests precise coordinates, as if someone provided them with our location. Not me, Luther said. I've had no contact with anyone outside this fortress. Perhaps not directly, Kalen interjected. But a transmitter could have been activated, or a tracking device. I was searched thoroughly when captured, Luther pointed out. And I've been under constant surveillance since... Vorak stopped directly in front of Luther. There is another possibility, that you were sent here specifically, that your capture was arranged. The implication was clear. They suspected him of being an infiltrator, placed deliberately to aid in whatever operation was now unfolding. If that were true, Luther said slowly, why would I have saved the Warlord? Surely your assassination attempt would have served my purpose better. A moment of stunned silence followed his words. Vorak's ears flattened against his skull. What did you say? Too late. Luther realized his mistake. In his weakened state, he had revealed knowledge he shouldn't have had, that the toxin had been an assassination attempt, not merely an illness or accident. The toxin, he said, trying to recover. Its design was too specific to be anything but targeted assassination. And yet, Kalen said, stepping closer, you never reported this conclusion officially. It appears in none of your documented work in the medical bay. Luther's mind raced. I reported my findings to the Warlord directly. Did you? Vorak's voice was dangerously quiet. How interesting that she never shared this critical intelligence with her command staff. Luther remained silent, understanding that he had inadvertently revealed something significant, perhaps confirmation of suspicions Scylla herself had harbored. Vorak turned to the officers. Prepare the communication array. When the human vessel reaches optimal range, transmit the prepared message. What message? Luther demanded. Vorak's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile on a human face, but on his was purely predatory. A distress call, allegedly from you, warning them of a trap. When they alter course to avoid our primary defensive grid, they'll move directly into range of our concealed batteries. They'll be destroyed, Luther realized aloud. Yes, and with them. Any evidence of collaboration. Vorak nodded to Kalen. Once the vessel is eliminated, execute the prisoner. The official record will show he died attempting escape during the security alert. Kalen nodded, her hand moving to the weapon at her side. The Warlord won't allow this, Luther said, playing the only card he had left. The Warlord, Vorak replied coldly, will be presented with evidence of your treachery. Communications logs showing you activated a hidden transmitter during your treatment of her. She will believe you used her vulnerability to betray her trust. The pieces fell into place in Luther's mind. It was you. You poisoned her. Vorak's expression didn't change. A necessary step toward ending this war decisively. Scylla has grown, hesitant, unwilling to take the final measures needed for total victory. You mean genocide, Luther translated. I mean survival, Vorak snarled. This sector cannot sustain both our species. One must eliminate the other. Luther glanced at the tactical displays around the room. The human vessel was now clearly visible, its approach vector bringing it steadily closer to the fortress. He needed to warn them somehow, but more importantly, he needed to alert Scylla to the conspiracy unfolding within her command. With his remaining arm, he lunged for the nearest console. His fingers managed to hit the emergency broadcast key before Kalen's weapon connected with the back of his skull, sending him crashing to the floor. Through blurring vision, he saw Vorak leaning over him. Brave, but futile. That broadcast was contained within this room's security protocols. Check again, came a cold voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Scylla standing there, flanked by her personal guard. Her eyes blazed with fury, her posture that of a predator about to strike. Warlord, Vorak began. We were just interrogating the prisoner about his connection to the approaching vessel. Were you? Scylla stepped into the room, her guards moving to secure the officers at the consoles. Strange. I heard a different conversation entirely. She held up a small device. Surveillance override. Installed in my quarters and linked to my neural implants. Activated the moment I suspected treachery within my command. Vorak's expression hardened. Whatever you think you heard. I heard enough. Siller cut him off. Confession of assassination. Plans to destroy an approaching vessel without proper identification protocols. Intent to execute a prisoner under my protection. Her voice dropped to a dangerous purr. But, most damning of all, I heard you speak of eliminating my entire species as necessary for your victory. Confusion crossed Vorak's face. Your species? We are the same? Are we? Siller's eyes narrowed. The toxin you used, the one Luther identified, targets specific genetic markers. Markers present only in pure lineage Amber clan like myself, not in those with diluted bloodlines. Vorak's surprise gave way to calculation. The human vessel approaches. Warlord. Whatever your suspicions, the immediate threat is already contained, Siller interrupted. While you plotted in secrecy, I took action openly. The vessel has been contacted and identified. A medical extraction team responding to a priority signal. Now it was Luther's turn to be surprised. Medical extraction? I sent no signal. No, Siller agreed. I did. Using your authentication codes, retrieved from your captured equipment. She turned her gaze to him briefly. I suspected Vorak's involvement from the moment you identified the toxin's specificity. When the alert came about the approaching vessel, I decided to test my theory. Luther struggled to his feet, his head pounding from Kalen's blow. You used me as bait. I used you as confirmation, Siller corrected. Had Vorak been innocent, he would have brought his concerns to me directly. Instead, she gestured to the room around them. Vorak's hand moved toward his weapon, but Siller's guards were faster. In seconds, both he and Kalen were disarmed and restrained. Take them to security containment, Siller ordered. Full neural suppression. I want every communication they've sent in the past month analyzed. As the conspirators were led away, Siller turned to Luther. The medical vessel is requesting permission to retrieve you. Their identification codes match the Starlight medical frigate. Luther knew the Starlight. Captain Mira's vessel specialized in high-risk medical evacuations from combat zones. They're legitimate, he confirmed. But why would you allow them to approach? I'm still your prisoner. Siller studied him for a long moment. You saved my life at great personal cost. According to our most ancient laws, that creates a bond that supersedes all others, including the enmity between our species. So you're releasing me? Luther asked incredulously. I am acknowledging you as my equal, Siller corrected, which means you are no longer a prisoner but a guest, one who is free to depart if he wishes. Luther struggled to comprehend the implications. And the war? What happens when I return to my people? Siller's expression became contemplative. Vorak's treachery has revealed deeper problems within our command structure, and perhaps within our society. Our drive for genetic purity, our refusal to consider coexistence. She gestured to his missing arm. Your sacrifice challenges assumptions I have held my entire life. She moved to a console, typing commands that brought up a secure communication channel. Before you leave, there is something you should see. The screen filled with encoded data, transmission logs, tactical orders, and intelligence reports. Luther recognized some of the military designations. What am I looking at? Evidence recovered from Vorak's private communications. Siller explained. He has been in contact with extremist factions within your military, those who, like him, believe total elimination of the enemy is the only solution. Luther scanned the data, his blood running cold as he recognized certain names, high-ranking officers who had been pushing for escalation of the conflict for years. False flag operations, he murmured, reading further. Staged atrocities blamed on Amber Clan forces. Deliberate targeting of civilian settlements to provoke retaliation. On both sides, Siller confirmed. Vorak provided similar intelligence to human extremists about Amber Clan civilian movements. Luther looked up at her. Why show me this? Because you have proven yourself honorable. Perhaps the first human I have ever been able to trust. Siller's gaze was steady. This evidence must reach those within your command who still desire peace. Just as I must present it to my clan council. Understanding dawned. You're proposing a ceasefire. I am proposing, Siller said carefully, that we explore alternatives to mutual annihilation, beginning with exposing those who have deliberately prolonged and escalated this conflict for their own purposes. Luther nodded slowly. Captain Mira can be trusted. She has direct channels to Admiral Chen, who has consistently advocated for diplomatic solutions. Then we must prepare this data for transmission, Siller decided. Your vessel will arrive within the hour. They worked quickly, compiling the evidence into an encrypted package that would bypass standard military sensors and reach Admiral Chen directly. As they worked, Luther became increasingly aware of Siller watching him with an unreadable expression. Something troubling you? He finally asked. I am unused to cooperating with humans, she admitted. Particularly one who has seen me at my most vulnerable. If it helps, Luther said wryly. You've seen me at my worst too. Not many people can say they've watched me cut off my own arm. To his surprise, Siller's lips curved in what might have been a smile. You have a strange sense of humor for one who has suffered so much. Gallows humor, standard issue for combat medics. She nodded, her expression becoming serious again. The life debt between us, it is not something I take lightly. In ancient times, such bonds sometimes lasted beyond a single act of repayment. Luther paused in his work. Meaning? Meaning that even after you return to your people, even after this evidence is delivered, the connection between us remains. Her golden eyes held his. Should you ever require my aid, you need only call upon that bond. The implications were staggering. The Amber Warlord, one of the most feared military leaders in the sector, offering personal allegiance to a human combat medic. I'm not sure my superiors would know what to make of that, Luther said honestly. Nor would mine, Siller acknowledged. Which is why it remains between us alone, until circumstances require otherwise. A communication alert interrupted their conversation. The Starlight had reached stable orbit and was requesting landing coordinates for a medical shuttle. It is time, Siller said, securing the data package and handing it to Luther. Your people await. She escorted him personally to the landing bay, ignoring the shocked expressions of her soldiers as they passed. The Warlord, walking alongside a one-armed human prisoner, treating him as an equal, was not a sight anyone had expected to see. As they reached the bay, Luther turned to her. What will happen to Vorak and Kalen? Justice, Siller replied simply. Clan law is clear on the punishment for attempting to assassinate a warlord. Luther nodded, understanding that some aspects of Amber Clan culture remained unchanged despite this unprecedented moment of cooperation. Through the viewport, they could see the medical shuttle beginning its descent, the human insignia bright against the black hull. Luther Hayes, Siller said formally, using his full name for the first time. You entered this fortress as my enemy and prisoner. You leave as my equal and ally. May the stars witness our bond. Luther recognized the ritual nature of her words. Some ancient Amber Clan farewell he had never expected to hear directed at a human. Siller of the Amber Clan, he replied, improvising his response. I came here to heal and do no harm. I leave with hope that others may follow the same path. She nodded, apparently satisfied with his answer. As the shuttle touched down and the ramp extended, she stepped back, allowing him to proceed alone. Captain Mira herself stood at the base of the ramp, her expression a mixture of disbelief and concern as she took in his missing arm and the Amber Clan warlord standing in the background. "Medic Hayes," she called. "Are you able to board under your own power?" Luther took a step toward the shuttle, then paused, turning back to Siller. "The evidence we prepared. It could change everything, but only if both sides are willing to listen." "Then we must make them listen," Siller replied. "Go now. Complete your mission as I will complete mine." Luther nodded and made his way down to Captain Mira, who immediately began scanning him with medical equipment. "What happened to your arm?" she demanded as they entered the shuttle. "And why is the Amber Warlord personally overseeing your release?" "It's a long story," Luther said, securing the data package in his medical tunic. "One that might just help end this war." As the shuttle doors closed and the engines powered up for departure, Luther caught a final glimpse of Siller through the viewport. The Amber Warlord stood tall, her golden eyes fixed on the departing craft, a solitary figure against the vast darkness of space. The shuttle lifted off, breaking free of the moon's minimal gravity and accelerating toward the waiting starlight. Captain Mira insisted on immediate medical treatment, but Luther refused to relinquish the data package until they had established a secure direct channel to Admiral Chen. "This is beyond classified," he told her, fighting through pain and exhaustion. "What I learned in that fortress changes everything we thought we knew about this conflict." By the time they reached the starlight, Luther had briefed Mira on the essentials: the assassination attempt against Siller, Vorek's conspiracy, and the evidence of collusion between extremists on both sides. "If this is verified," Mira said, her expression grave, "it would explain why peace efforts have consistently failed. Both negotiating teams were being undermined from within." "Exactly," Luther agreed. "Which is why we need to get this directly to Admiral Chen, before anyone else can intercept or suppress it." The Starlight's communications officer established the secure channel, and Luther found himself face to face with the Admiral himself, a stern-faced man whose reputation for integrity was matched only by his tactical brilliance. "Medic Hayes," the Admiral acknowledged. "Captain Mira informs me you have intelligence of critical importance." "Yes, sir." Luther transmitted the encrypted data package. "Evidence of a conspiracy spanning both human and Amber Clan military hierarchies. Individuals who have been deliberately prolonging and escalating the conflict through false flag operations and strategic sabotage of peace initiatives." Admiral Chen's expression remained neutral as he reviewed the incoming data, but Luther could see the tension in his posture. "This is extensive, and you believe it to be authentic?" "I do, sir. I witnessed the Amber Warlord herself uncover part of this conspiracy. She nearly died from an assassination attempt orchestrated by her own second-in-command, specifically to prevent her from discovering these connections." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "And your missing arm, Hayes? Captain Mira reports it was surgically removed. Recently." Luther hesitated, then decided on the unvarnished truth. "I amputated it myself, sir, to save the Warlord's life. The toxin used against her required a bone marrow transplant from a compatible donor. I was the only option available." A long silence followed the statement. When Admiral Chen finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "You sacrificed your limb to save the enemy commander. I saw an opportunity to prevent further escalation. Sir, General Vorak, who attempted to assassinate her, was explicitly planning genocide against human settlements in this sector. The Warlord, by contrast, has now demonstrated willingness to expose the conspiracy and consider alternative approaches to the conflict." Admiral Chen leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "So, in essence, you've opened a direct diplomatic channel to the Amber Clan High Command through a life debt with their warlord." "That's one way of putting it, sir. A rather effective way. I'd say." For the first time, a hint of approval crossed the Admiral's face. Do you believe she will honor this bond once you're safely away from her territory? Without question, sir, Luther replied with absolute certainty. The evidence she provided against her own officers proves her commitment. The Admiral nodded slowly. Very well. I'm ordering the Starlight to proceed directly to Outpost Vega. I'll meet you there personally to debrief and assess this intelligence. He paused. And Hayes, expect a full medical evaluation and psychological assessment upon arrival. Understood, sir. As the communication ended, Luther finally allowed himself to be escorted to the medical bay. The Starlight's chief medical officer, Dr. Miranda Telles, greeted him with professional concern. Combat Medic First Class Luther Hayes, she read from his file. You've had quite an experience. That's one way of putting it, Luther agreed, easing himself onto the examination platform. As Dr. Telles began her assessment, Luther found his thoughts returning to the volcanic glass fortress and its golden-eyed warlord. He wondered if Siller was already presenting the evidence to her clan council, if she was facing resistance or acceptance, if the life debt between them would ever be called upon again. Whatever happened next, he knew the war had fundamentally changed. A human and an Amber clan, enemies by all conventional definitions, had found common ground in mutual survival and a shared desire for truth. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a beginning. And as the Starlight accelerated toward Outpost Vega, Luther Hayes closed his eyes and allowed himself, for the first time since his capture, to hope. 2 weeks later, Luther stood at the viewport of Outpost Vega, watching the distant stars and wondering which one might be the sun that the Amber Clan fortress orbited. His left shoulder had been fitted with an advanced prosthetic, not quite as good as the original, but functional enough. Admiral Chen had personally recommended him for the Distinguished Service Cross, though the citation carefully omitted certain details about exactly how he had escaped captivity. The debriefings had been extensive, the intelligence teams poring over every detail of the evidence Siller had provided. Arrests had already been made among the human military hierarchy, officers whose communications with Vorak and other Amber Clan extremists proved their complicity in prolonging the war. Luther had been asked the same questions dozens of times. Did he believe Siller was sincere? Could the life debt be trusted? Was there genuine potential for ceasefire negotiations? To all of these, his answer remained constant, yes. A soft chime alerted him to someone entering his quarters. He turned to see Admiral Chen himself, standing in the doorway. "Sir," Luther acknowledged, straightening to attention. "At ease, Hayes." The Admiral moved to join him at the viewport. "Thought you might like to know. We've received communication from the Amber Clan High Command. Official this time, through proper diplomatic channels." Luther's heart rate quickened. "And?" "Warlord Siller has been confirmed as Supreme Commander of all Amber Clan forces in this sector. Her position was challenged by several clan leaders after the arrests of Vorak and his collaborators. But she prevailed." Chen's expression was carefully neutral. "She has proposed direct peace talks, to begin within the month." "That's unexpected progress, sir." "Indeed." The Admiral turned to face him directly. "She specifically requested your presence at these talks. As her equal under clan law, apparently." Luther blinked in surprise. "I'm a combat medic, sir, not a diplomat." "So you keep saying." A rare smile crossed Chen's face. "And yet you've accomplished more for peace in 2 weeks than our diplomatic corps has managed in 5 years. Will you approve her request, sir?" The Admiral was silent for a moment, considering. "The Joint Chiefs are hesitant. Having a relatively junior officer involved in high-level negotiations is unorthodox, to say the least." Luther nodded, understanding the political complexities involved. "However," Chen continued, "I've convinced them that the unique connection between you and the Warlord represents an opportunity we cannot afford to waste." He handed Luther a datapad. Your new orders. You're being temporarily assigned to the Diplomatic Corps as a special liaison to the Amber Clan Command. Luther took the pad, scanning the orders with disbelief. Sir, I'm not trained for... You weren't trained to amputate your own arm to save an enemy commander either, Chen interrupted dryly. Yet, here we are. Put that way, Luther couldn't argue. When do I leave? The diplomatic vessel departs in 48 hours. You'll rendezvous with the Amber Clan delegation at neutral coordinates. Chen's expression became serious again. This is unprecedented territory. Hayes, if it succeeds, it could end a conflict that has cost millions of lives. If it fails. It won't fail, sir, Luther said with quiet confidence. Not if Siller and I have any say in the matter. The Admiral studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. I believe you actually mean that. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, Hayes. The prosthetic arm you've been fitted with. It's been modified with some additional features you might find useful in your new role. Dr. Tellis can brief you on the details. After the Admiral left, Luther returned his gaze to the stars. Somewhere out there, an alien warlord with golden eyes was also preparing for these historic talks. An enemy turned ally through the most unexpected of circumstances. He looked down at his prosthetic arm, wondering what modifications Chen had authorized, and found himself smiling. Whatever came next, he was ready. The bond forged in blood and sacrifice between human and Amber Clan would not be easily broken. And perhaps, just perhaps, it might become the foundation for a lasting peace. As Outpost Vega rotated slowly in the darkness of space, Luther Hayes made a silent promise to the distant stars. The sacrifice of his arm would not be in vain. The bridge between enemies had been built. Now, it was time to see who would have the courage to cross it.